Hello RPGers and welcome again to Briefings for the Descent. On today's episode we're going to be talking about storytelling RPGs. What are they? How do they work? And would you like to play them? Stick around. Hello again everybody, I'm Ken Oswald and today I have as co-host Paul Turner and we're going to be talking about storytelling RPGs. But first we're going to get to today's magic items.
Yay, magic items.
Yes, things to make your world better for role-playing.
And I have a feeling this has to do with our theme today, is that correct?
It does, because we have for you the Storyteller's Dictionary. And this is by the good people that bring you all things Castles and Crusades, Troll Lord games.
Yep.
And we also have the Storyteller's Thesaurus. Now, this is a bit of a guilty pleasure episode for me and these particular items because I love reference material. I once went to a Christmas party where you played Dirty Santa.
Right.
And I brought a 1,000-page dictionary, you know, one of those big brick things, because I figured, hey, I'll probably wind up with that.
But, you were hoping.
Yes, yes.
I'd like the heavy pound one right there.
Yes, absolutely. It was great. But the great thing about these guys is they are designed for people that do storytelling either with role-playing games or if you're a writer and you want to get a variance of words, if you will, or look up something in particular that might fit what you're writing, and it tends to have a fantasy, history, and horror bent to these, as it says in the title.
Yeah.
And
I've read books, and you probably have too, where the author used, where the author uses similar terminology throughout. In other words, he doesn't mix it up. A hammer is called a hammer all the way through.
Yes.
And so what these will do, for especially if you're home brewing and things like that, is be able to mix it up if you want to call something different.
For sure. And any traditional thesauruses will do that. The great thing about these guys is, just like you were saying, it breaks things up into chapters that have particular themes. You'll note I had the chapter Symbology and Symbolic Objects and Places.
Okay.
Because that's what I'm working on in my current D&D campaign. Things that have religious significance. So you can just go in and you can pick out particular religious relics or artifacts, places, the names of clergy, all in one convenient little place.
And flavor obviously varies from word to word.
Absolutely.
So if you want to use it, if you want to say something very specific, there's a different word you could use than maybe what you're using.
Absolutely.
To clarify your point.
And that's where your dictionary comes in too, because the way I start things, my kind of work process is I'll get into the thesaurus just to look up cool sounding names, because we want the game to be cool.
Yes. You do.
So, and then if I don't know what it is, we just pick up the companion and not only will the dictionary spell out the definition of that particular thing, but it'll give you a context in which you can use it and perhaps some alternatives. So yeah, these things are great. I love them. You can get them in PDF format online, or you can get these nice hardbound copies. I, of course, own both.
And we can actually, too, we'll be happy to put a link in Briefings of the Descent.
Yes.
Briefings for the Descent, we'll put a link right in there for you, and so you can find it for yourself.
And so first off, we're going to talk about a release from Troll Lord Games, this week's crit hit, which is the Castles and Crusades Adventurer's Backpack. And this is kind of like their version of Unearthed Arcana for D&D. Because they've got some new rules in it. They give you new classes, custom backpacks for the name of the book itself, for different character classes and just different focuses within those classes. So, and really, to me, if you want to talk about 5th Ed and make a comparison, it's kind of like their version of Xanathar's Guide, I would say. What do you think?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And I think, too, the resource is good because a new player doesn't know what the player needs. If they're a
Right.
rogue or if they're a paladin or whatever, and they're split up on all these different backpacks, and they're just going to grab their sack and say, okay, that's what's in your sack.
Right.
That's what you got.
Yeah, it's very much kind of like the overkill of the way the player's handbook in 5th Ed gives you, and you can just pick this starting equipment list,
Right.
tack it on.
Right.
Same way with these things.
Sure.
So, good resource if you play Castles and Crusades or any kind of D20 OSR. You can port that into your 5th Ed game if you like. So check it out. I think you guys will like it.
That's right.
So,
Yes.
on to today's topic, storytelling. Role-playing games.
Yes.
So, what differentiates a storytelling role-playing game, do you think? Well, when you hear that,
Mm-hmm.
you play a lot of RPGs.
Yeah.
What do you think when we say storytelling RPG?
Well, I think less dice and more role play.
Yeah.
That's initially
Yeah.
what I think is there's not as many roles because you're engaged. The players are engaged with each other, and maybe the GM or DM is engaged with their players in more storytelling versus roll for that.
Mm-hmm. Right. And this is kind of like the modern advice for RPGs, especially in the era of 5e and the Pathfinder revision that's coming. Personally, I think this is where role-playing games are going to diverge in the future. They're going to become more of these, if we're talking about GNS theory, we're talking about narrativist type stuff, right?
Sure, absolutely.
You know how I love that geeky stuff,
You
right?
do like it. And that's crunchy, and you know what? Look, a game can be crunchy and have good storytelling.
It can.
It's
And,
not absent of storytelling just because
right.
it has some crunchy bits to it.
Right.
The GM's in control of how much
Absolutely.
that can happen.
And you've played a lot of Pathfinder.
I did.
So, and
I
you've
have.
done a lot of society play
do.
as well. So you have
Mhm.
a lot of firsthand knowledge of that.
Yes.
And, some people are going to say society play tends to favor the crunch, the tactical, that sort of thing. I mean, Pathfinder, first edition Pathfinder is, derivative of D&D 3.5.
3.5, right?
So, and that's a pretty tactical game.
Sure, absolutely. It's and I would say that, and because I just recently played in a 5th Ed Adventurers League, played a couple of games there, and both of those are fast paced. There's at least in the games I've played, they're fast paced. They're super driven, and in the ones I've played in, your backstory does not necessarily come into play. In other words, the whoever's GM or DMing is not necessarily worried about your character as much as he is trying to get
Right.
the adventures done. So I think that also speaks to how much time is spent. If you have, it depends how you're going to do that 3 hours or that 3.5 hour game
Right.
session. Is it going to be just, it's like my wife and I, right? We drive, listen,
Oh, the
I
wives.
I like to wander. If I see a giant pickle on the side of the road, I go, oh, we should go see the big giant pickle. When are we going to see that again? She's like,
Yeah.
no, we have to get there, right? And like she's destination driven,
Yes.
and I am more like, let's just
You're a free spirit.
the big giant, whatever that is, ball of hay that I string or whatever that I need to go see. I want to go see that, and I think games are driven that way too.
Yes.
Let's drive towards the end,
Yes.
or let's kind of wander a little bit and see where we go.
Right. And that's a really good point because so we can talk about role-playing games designed to be storytelling RPGs and those that are not. And I mean, you can make a broad general statement, hey, role-playing games are about storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Ask anybody and they'll say, the catchphrase today is collaborative storytelling. And there's some, in the designers, developers, the various RPG professionals out there, some of them have some problems with this word story. So it becomes kind of an important distinction, right? And that's kind of why we wanted to pull this out on this episode as to what do people mean by that, because any and all RPGs are storytelling. So talking about 5th Ed, like you did then, it's what the GM brings to the table. I mean, I think you and I both know that role-playing games really, it comes down to the GM. A lot, a lot.
Right.
And but there's also a such thing as the toolbox. The role-playing game in particular is your toolbox. And D&D 5th Ed makes background and things of that nature about your character a mechanic. It's something that influences how your character works, on a mechanics level. You get something from it to
Right.
bring to the game elements itself.
Right.
The gamer part of GNS.
Right.
So yeah, it really does come down to how does a game master or dungeon master approach things like storytelling or narrativist gaming.
Right, and I think the mechanic, though, is that GM should treat the mechanic as a means to an end, not
Right.
an end of
Right,
itself.
right.
That if I'm not getting from the people around, because they've rolled up characters, they have equipped them, and if your players are wanting to develop those characters, well, then the mechanic should help draw that out
Yes,
through all the process.
And that's exactly my point. You want games where those mechanics help draw that out. Now, there are role-playing games that specifically do that. They really lean on that. So I love that 5e incorporates these elements into it and begins walking you down that path. It's definitely much more narrativist and storytelling than any other edition, including all the way back to original D&D, has ever been.
Yep.
So it is a great game to get. But there are definitely games that focus even more on that, even down to the mechanics level, where they really get you. It's not just a gamer element. Your background in D&D 5e is really a gamist element.
Right.
It's mechanics.
Right.
But there are RPGs that write rules, storytelling rules built into characters, built into the game itself, that are about the storytelling and will bring out elements of what you're doing in game. So like the first one that was ever written is Prince Valiant. Claims to be a storytelling game, and it does begin kind of a rules-like tradition early on, where it's working with keywords, and it really wants players to kind of narrate things. But the one that we're really going to know that has that storytelling moniker on it is Vampire the Masquerade,
Right.
In the 90s.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So did you ever get your hands on
I
any
did
of
not.
that?
I did not. I was committed at that point. I would think I was still playing second edition at that
Yes,
point.
yes, as many people were.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't until the late 90s that we get 3.0.
Right. Yep.
So, but yeah, Vampire the Masquerade lauded itself as a storytelling game, but it was really because it focused more on kind of a gritty gothic theme, which was supposed to be more about role-playing. Now, I think in the end, Vampire the Masquerade and other World of Darkness games, Werewolf and Wraith and, all of those books, ultimately I think they become a superhero game, a dark superhero game, because again, it comes down to the mechanics, and the mechanics didn't talk about role-playing elements. They talked about what your character got if you selected this particular ability or that particular spell. Now, they handled it in a very narrativist way often. You got to, like with Mage, you could just make up spells,
Yep.
and say what they do, and then there were rules to handle that, which gets really close to that kind of storytelling thing. But ultimately, again, it's, can I beat you up? Because vampire is very confrontational.
Sure.
People say political.
Right.
And that's true.
Well, they have factions, they have things. Sure, there's some competitiveness in there.
Right.
But ultimately, the element of storytelling is to set the players up. It's
Yes.
not about
Yes.
the GM.
Absolutely.
It's to set the players up to tell a story that they want to be told. Where their character develops from, where they're, and I push my players to kind of have a little bit of that backstory, and so I pick up on that thread, and then I find the mechanics that are going to help
Right.
do that for them,
Yep.
versus saying, well, I'm just going to, just to drive the story,
Right.
Or finish the story.
And this is a very traditional approach. When we talk about storytelling and role-playing games, it generally falls more towards the game master. They talk about, writing a compelling story or plot that you lead your players through and have some excitement to it. Now, the way that storytelling RPGs tend to differ, the ones that really get into this, take the White Hack, for instance. The White Hack is a D20 OSR game, so it has a very old-school D&D feel, except all of its abilities for the players are just keywords, and they allow the players to make up what those do.
Right.
So you can kind of justify to your GM, hey, I'm going to make this roll and get this effect, and this is why. And the mechanic will actually not only shape the story for that role in that moment, but it can even do this kind of flashback sort of thing where it says, and the reason I can do this is because way back in my character's history, with
Right.
his association with this group, this happened.
Right.
So I can use intelligence for climbing as a result, because it's not about my dexterity, it's about knowing the secret path through the wall.
Right, and I think it has to do with the proficiency of the players to be able to tell a story as well. So it depends who you have around your table. Do they have the flexibility to be able to go back into that and do that? So I think, once you set up your time with your, really defining the game and saying, okay, what would you guys like out of this? And if you know your players well enough, you'll know who can do that, and maybe
that
who
social
needs
contract,
who needs the extra prompting, or who needs this mechanic, or who needs this thing to be able to give into the story the way they can.
Yeah, and it's a really important point, because RPGs are so different nowadays. That, again, this is what I'm talking about is storytelling versus a traditional RPG. They're really different, and the way players interact with those are really different. It's almost like a bunch of game masters getting together and playing something.
Yeah.
Improv skills become really important. Creativity becomes really important, and so not to stereotype, but if you're someone that plays as a player Pathfinder Society a lot, and you really like the tactics, that's not your thing. And that's an important distinction, is really what we're talking about, because storytelling is used as kind of just a common catchphrase nowadays. When someone walks out to buy a new RPG, they're really getting into the hobby, they do a search online, and they encounter something like Apocalypse World, or The White Hack, or Fiasco, a very classic storytelling role-playing game. They're going to be taken aback if all they've ever played is D20.
or watched, if they're watching Critical Hit, or if they're watching, and they're saying that's what that is, and they get something else. Right. It's all about expectation.
Yeah, it is about the expectation, and about, you can put a label on anything, and what we really want to do is just disambiguate when a RPG tells you it's a storytelling game and it uses these particular mechanics to encourage that storytelling or prompt that storytelling. It's a very different thing from backgrounds in D&D.
Right.
So that's our take on storytelling games for today, folks. Please, if you are someone that would like to showcase a product with us and would like to be a sponsor, give us a shout. Check out our email address and give us a message. And definitely let us know what you think about storytelling games, and make some comments and suggestions on future episodes of BFTD. And yes,
comments down below.
Right down below. And we'll talk to you next time. Thanks much for watching.